Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at Blaine Storm's Soul. This sci-fi thriller is really something. It doesn't just ask, what if we could live forever? It goes deeper, like way deeper.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder, is that even something we want? If you might not be you anymore. I'm excited to unpack this. You've given me some pretty fascinating source material on this.
It's interesting you say that because, yeah, the book really digs into all those little nuances of digital immortality, like all the different angles. Storm definitely doesn't shy away from the downsides, especially when you start talking about technology like SoulSync.
Right. And it's not just a simple upload your brain and boom, you live in this computer situation. SoulSync actually transfers consciousness between beings and creates like a copy. So then the question is, what happens to the original?
And that's when things start to get a little complicated. We follow Tom Jefferies, he's the neuroscientist who invented SoulSync, and through him you see just how complex this whole thing gets. Like, he starts with this thing called Haven Wave. He was just aiming to revolutionize virtual reality, make it more immersive, but then it kind of accidentally turns into something, well, a lot bigger.
It makes you think. Was it really an accident, though? Or was there something deeper driving Tom all along? Like, even if he started with virtual reality, his dying friend Marcus, that becomes a huge motivator.
Oh, absolutely. Tom's desperation to save Marcus, that drives almost every choice he makes, including partnering with Echelon. They're this, I don't know how else to put it, this shadowy organization with their own agenda. So the deal he makes with them to fund his research, well, it's like the classic Faustian bargain.
Makes me think, how far would I go to save someone I love? Would I cross any line? Tom's deal with the Echelon, that definitely leads him into some ethically gray areas.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And through this partnership, that's how we're introduced to Lucius Thorne. He's the head of Echelon. And through him, you start to see this chilling side of immortality. He's not about preserving life. He's about control and manipulation.
You get the sense that Thorne sees SoulSync as more than just, keeping people alive. It's about power, about reshaping humanity to fit into his vision. And that brings us to the experiment with the cat and the rat.
Right. That's where things get a little, I don't know, unsettling. Tom, he transfers the consciousness of a cat named Magic into a rat. And that proves that SoulSync, it can work across species. And then you have to think, what are the implications if this technology, if it gets into the wrong hands?
It's like Pandora's box. All of a sudden, the lines between species, they get all blurred. The potential for exploitation, it just becomes huge. It makes you think maybe some discoveries are better left undiscovered.
And then there's Simeon. He's a monkey who ends up containing the consciousness of Marcus. And he's not just a lab animal anymore. He's like a window into what it's like to experience consciousness, but in a completely different body.
Yeah, Simeon's whole existence, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But also kind of disturbing at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it challenges how we even understand consciousness. And it reveals this disturbing concept of shells, just empty human hosts.
That's a really important point you bring up because it forces us to confront how Echelon, how they view human life. They literally see people as empty vessels just waiting to be inhabited by, copied consciousnesses.
And that's when the conflict really starts to escalate, right? Because Tom and Cassandra, who's an Echelon insider, they decide to go ahead and transfer Marcus into a healthy host. So they're going against Echelon's control.
Exactly. They're trying to save Marcus. But their actions, it exposes this growing rift within Echelon. Thorne, he finds out about the unauthorized transfer, and that's when the power struggle starts between him and this newly embodied Marcus, who now calls himself Thorne Marcus.
It feels like the theme of identity is really starting to take shape here. Because Thorne Marcus, he isn't just Marcus in a new body. He's like this combination of both, shaped by the experiences of both.
And then it gets even more complicated when copies of Tom, Billy, and Andy, who's Echelon's security chief, start popping up. The very act of transferring consciousness, it seems to create these copies, each with their own personality and desires.
Wait, so the copies, they have their own personalities? Wow, that throws a whole new wrench into things. So if they're not just duplicates, how do they even interact with the originals? What makes them different?
And that's a question that Storm explores brilliantly. And it leads to absolute chaos, especially when the copies start acting independently, pursuing their own agendas.
So it's not even just about the morality of transferring consciousness anymore. Now it's about control and the unintended consequences. And to make things even worse, Echelon, they start targeting vulnerable populations for hosts.
Right, and the ethical implications of that, I mean, it's staggering. Echelon's need for hosts, it becomes this horrifying example of how easily good intentions can be twisted to serve darker purposes.
It makes you wonder if any organization could handle this kind of power responsibly,
Hmm.
especially when we see Thorne, influenced by Sloan, who's this high-ranking government official, becoming more and more obsessed with control.
Yeah, Sloane's influence, it pushes Thorne toward this terrifying vision of the future, a world where Echelon basically controls humanity through copied consciousnesses, and it becomes this fight for the very soul of humanity.
Okay, so we've got a desperate race against time, morally compromised characters, and a shadowy organization with a chilling agenda. So where do things go from here? I am hooked.
Well, things go completely sideways. A Billy copy, this one named Nick, ends up dead. And Andy, he's Echelon's security chief. He escapes with this woman, Kina. Nick had soul synced with her. She was a prostitute. It all just blows up.
So much for Echelon's tight control. It seems like those copies, they're becoming a real problem, especially with Andy out there knowing all their secrets.
It's a total mess for them. Back at Billy's house, things are spiraling too. Imagine he's trying to handle a bunch of rogue copies. Andy, Tina, and even two motel employees, Jesse and Maria, they got caught up in this somehow.
Wait, motel employees? How they get pulled into this whole consciousness transfer shadowy organization thing? It seems like SoulSync is spreading way further than anyone planned.
It shows you how fast things can fall apart. Jesse, he's desperate and ends up escaping with the limo driver, and they soul sync. And get this, their plan is to recruit more Billies.
Okay, things are getting really out of control. But while all this is happening, there's a police investigation into Nick's death. That can't be good for Echelon.
Not at all. The investigation leads straight back to them. Their whole operation is exposed. And Thorne, he's completely consumed by Sloane's consciousness now, seizes control. He's going to put his plan for world domination into action.
So Tom, Mark, and Cassandra, they have to stop Thorne, rescue Andy, and expose Sloane's plan. It's like an impossible task.
It's a real David and Goliath situation. But they do have one advantage. They know SoulSync inside and out. They know how it works, and more importantly, how to break it.
This is where Simeon really changes things.
Right.
He somehow transfers Thorne's consciousness into himself. So Tom and the others, they have control of Thorne's body and can access all of Echelon's secrets.
A brilliant plan, but so risky. Thorne's body is still connected to Echelon's network, which means Sloane, even without his own body, he's still a threat.
And then there's that moment when Billy ends up in Cassandra's body. It's like some kind of messed up identity swap. How does that even happen?
Sloane, he's desperate to regain control, so he accidentally creates a Billy copy and transfers it into Cassandra. Talk about a backfire.
Oh man, poor Cassandra. Imagine, you suddenly have Billy's consciousness in control. It makes you think about the ethics of all of this. It's not just about living longer, it's about who gets to actually live that life.
That's a really important point, because Billy and Cassandra, well, despite the weirdness, he's key in the final confrontation. He knows SoulSync and helps Tom and the others fight back against Sloane.
So even with all this chaos and the ethical questions, there's this weird alliance forming. It makes you wonder, can copies break free and fight for what they believe in?
It shows you that consciousness, even copied, it's still unique. And that can lead to unpredictable things, which is exactly what happens when they escape from Echelon.
That escape scene, it's so intense. Gunfights, explosions, it's crazy. Storm doesn't hold back. But even with all the action, the characters are still struggling with so much.
Yeah, you're right. We see their fear, their loss, and their hope. They get out, but there's a cost. People die, sacrifices are made that can't be undone.
It really drives home the point that even with technology that can seemingly conquer death, there are still consequences. You can't escape the universe without paying a price. But what about Jesse and the limo driver? They get away from the chaos at Billy's. What happens to them?
That's a fascinating part of the story. They pull off this crazy heist, disappear, and find a kind of, I don't know, unconventional love with each other. It shows that even in the middle of conspiracies and mind-bending technology, there are these stories of hope.
Yeah, it's like their story represents the bigger themes of the book. Survival, adaptation, and finding connection in unexpected places.
But what about the big picture? What happens after the escape?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
So Tom, Mark, and Cassandra are free from Echelon, but Sloane's consciousness is still out there somewhere. And we have Jesse and Sam, the limo driver, off doing their own thing. It feels like the story is not over yet. What happens next?
That's what's so great about Soul. It doesn't wrap everything up perfectly. You're left with this feeling of unease, like the consequences of soul sync are just starting to spread.
It's like you can't put the genie back in the bottle. SoulSync is out in the world now, and who knows what'll happen. Especially with those copies like Jesse and Sam, they're outside any rules or control. It brings up so many questions, like can you even control something like consciousness once it's been copied? What happens when the copies change, when they get their own desires?
What about the original consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really gone when the copy's made? Or is there something left behind? The idea of like fragmented consciousness is both fascinating and terrifying.
It really makes you rethink what identity even means. Like, if you can make copies of yourself, what does it even mean to be the real you? Is there even a real you?
It makes you wonder if immortality through soul sync is even worth it.
Wow.
I mean, if you don't even know if it's really you that survives.
And then there's the moral side of it. Even if we forget about all the big questions, can we really say it's okay to exploit people for hosts, to make copies without their consent, and basically use them as tools?
It's like every answer soul sync gives you just leads to more questions. Like peeling an onion, there's always another layer.
That's what makes this book so good. It doesn't give you easy answers or tell you what's right and wrong. You have to face the questions, think about the ethical dilemmas, and decide for yourself what you think.
It stays with you. It makes you think. And in a world where technology is moving so fast, it feels really relevant. We're dealing with AI, genetic engineering, who knows what's next. Soul feels like a look into what the future might be like. Exciting and scary at the same time.
Totally. And I think one of the biggest messages of Soul is even with all this technology, it's still people making the choices. Our decisions, the lines we cross, the things we believe in, that's what shapes the future.
So if someone's listening and just picking up Soul for the first time, what's the one thing you want them to really think about?
I'd say this. Soul isn't just some sci-fi story. It's like it shows us our own fears and hopes about the future. It makes you think about what you'd give up for progress, for immortality, to make things better for everyone. And it reminds us that sometimes the biggest questions don't have easy answers.
That's a great point. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Soul. We hope this got you thinking, gave you some things to consider, and maybe even kept you up at night. Because it's one of those stories that gets under your skin, and it makes you question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what it even means to be human. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.